Okay, welcome to the Hammer Factor, issue number 24. Exciting show lined up. This is kind of a follow-up to our Tyler Bratt show talking about disease in the jungle. We've got Dr. Rocco coming on the show a little later, but before I want to introduce our co-host here. My name is John Grace, and on the line we have Louis Geltman, Policy Council Outdoor Alliance and North Fork champion. Hey, Louis, how's it going out there?
It's going great. Hey, man, I got a promotion. I'm the policy director now. Isn't that exciting?
Would you say it was because of the Hammer Factor that this happened, or only partly because of the Hammer Factor?
I've been trying to keep the Hammer Factor kind of under wraps at work, you know.
I think you're making a mistake career-wise.
What do they say about the Hammer Factor at work, Louis? Somebody at the office has to have heard it.
No, for sure. I think people are stoked that we're getting people interested in public land stuff and just spreading the gospel.
So what's your new job mean? What's that? Do you have like minions that work for you?
Not yet. I need some minions though. I think that would really move things along.
Well, let me just tell you, we had a minion come in for the Hammer Factor, and he didn't make it through the first day. So
he didn't survive.
I mean, in his defense, it's pretty rigorous.
Yeah,
there is a hazing. I know that's not politically correct anymore, but there is a hazing procedure. That's really not pleasant at all.
Yeah. So if you would like to be the associate producer for the Hammer Factor, send us a message. But you must
send a picture. Send a picture of your vacuum cleaning your mop.
But you must be warned, the first guy didn't make it through the first day. So that's just kind of how it is. Also on the horn, we have John Weld, whitewater legend and owner of Immersion Research. What's up, John?
Not much. Glad to be back. I'm amazed we're at 24. That's incredible.
Man, and you know, this is like...
That's more than 24 hours of us just running our mouths. You could waste literally an entire day listening to...
Say a day and a half, probably.
Three of us blathering.
We don't even talk about our YouTube channel, and I was looking on some of the stats on there the other day, and there was something like 382 days worth of people listening to this show. Like more than a year if you combine all the listeners and the time they've spent. So
that's a tremendous drain on the GDP. Health of our nation.
It makes me feel like we need to step up our game here a little bit. I will say that.
Yeah. I'd like to say I've done nothing in terms of fixing the website.
Dude, you're fired. You're fired. Dude, you're like Kramer.
It was all just like miscellaneous lines of code and like dead end links.
Train wreck. I'm trying. It's a little daunting to be honest. It's very similar to the White House that Barack Obama left. I don't even know where to begin. Yeah.
So, let's see.
Right.
I did the introductions, and now we're on to Louis. Let us have it. What's going on, bud?
What's going on? We're still getting people fired up on the this monument review process. The comment period for saving Bear's Ear is closed last week, but we're still kind of soliciting people to share stuff with Interior on basically the other 26 monuments that are under review right now. So, I don't know, catch up with American Whitewater or Outdoor Alliance and share comments with Interior on protecting these places if you haven't already. That's a big deal. I don't know, do you guys want to talk about the Paris stuff? It's not something we've done a ton of work on at Outdoor Alliance, but obviously it's in the news and kind of a sad day.
I do want to talk about that, but does this review, does this mean there's 26 national monuments that could be on the chopping block?
Potentially more than that. So the way this executive order was set up was to say that it was Trump instructing Interior to review every monument designated since 96 that is more than 100,000 acres, becomes more than 100,000 acres with the addition, or has the the term is something like an inadequate public participation process, which could mean literally anything. So basically, any national monument designated since '96 is potentially on the chopping block. Interior then sent out a list of the monuments that they were specifically reviewing, and that was a list of 27, including Bears Ears. Grand Staircase Escalante in Utah is another really prominent one on the list that it seems like they're pretty primed to try to undercut in some fashion. I don't know, you can check out the rest of the list, but I don't know, Hanford Reach up here, Crater Lakes, or not Crater Lake, Cascade Siskiyou down in Southern Oregon is on the list. So, if these are places that you have experience with or care about, it makes your comments all that much more important. So if you, go check these things out and, write a comment if you have a few minutes, it'd be really helpful.
Is there a person in the White House who is orchestrating this particular aspect of the administration? Or is it just...
It's...
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I just clearly I don't have a complete grasp on how things work in the government in a detailed fashion. But I don't see Trump doing this. I don't see him, researching monuments. Who in his staff would be the person orchestrating this kind of effort?
So I think that the initial drive for this has come from, some members of the Utah congressional delegation, like Rob Bishop, Orrin Hatch, Jason Chaffetz, and then they sort of have leaned in with the White House to say, we're upset about these national monument designations in Utah, but obviously they're not upset enough to do something in Congress about it, which they certainly could. What they really want is for the Trump administration to sort of do their dirty work for them, because they know that going after these monuments is politically not popular. Mm-hmm. They failed on someone in the White House. It's not the org chart over there it's very hard to figure out right now because there are so many empty jobs. They're just...
That's kind of what I'm getting at. You know what I mean? I'm trying to figure out how the mechanism of this kind of thing works. Because it would seem like an administration that is so understaffed at this moment, who has time to deal with something like this? Yeah,
it goes to Interior. So the principal person of responsibility there is Ryan Zinke, the Interior Secretary. Mm-hmm. And there are a few people working under him now who are people who, used to work in Interior under the Bush administration or came from, like oil and gas, or lobbyists, basically, who are, part of the transition team over there. And it is very understaffed. But I think that's, those are the folks who are kind of driving this stuff.
Before the show, we were talking about the Paris Agreement, also sort of informally. And as you mentioned, it's not really what you do, but the idea I threw out, and this was completely playing devil's advocate, was that while the administration was saying as a nation we're not going to be involved, at the same time a bunch of states stepped in and started forming their own I don't know how a state could be involved with a treaty that's supposed to work with nations. There seems to be a sentiment out there that there might be some strength to this. Individual states may be better at handling this issue than the federal government. And you made a really interesting point about it. But why don't you go ahead and?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of sort of just structural disadvantages to the states being able to effectively do that. Sort of ongoing catastrophe of climate change. But, I think what we were talking about earlier is that, anytime states try to adopt their own environmental standards or any sort of regulation, what you often get back from, sort of U.S. Chamber of Commerce types is this argument that you're creating this patchwork of regulation where there's 50 different regulations in 50 different states, and they would much prefer if the federal government established one uniform standard and made it easier for, businesses to comply with it. But, beyond that, I mean, I guess the fear is that by having different standards in every state, you're sort of spurring this like race to the bottom in terms of environmental protections or worker protections or whatever it might be, where big business is able to basically say, we're going to locate in whichever state offers the least stringent environmental requirements, the lowest wages, the least worker protections or whatever it might be. And I mean, obviously there's downsides to doing that. I mean, you're going to get, lower quality workforce or whatever it might be when you're locating your business somewhere that has really bad quality of life because there's no environmental protections or whatever. But, particularly for something like climate change, it's, where the effects are not so localized as they would be for other kinds of pollution. It would be easy to see states like Texas deciding that they're just going to do nothing.
So the U.S. has decided, or the administration decided the U.S. is not going to participate in this agreement. Could the next president reverse that plan if it's not Trump?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's hopefully what'll happen. But yeah. It's just another 4 years down the road of, it just seems like the longer we wait to take serious action to address climate change, the more expensive it's going to become. And, I think 20 years ago, we could have addressed this in a way that would have been, economically beneficial. And I think that addressing it still would be in a lot of ways, but it's, I don't know, just the further down the road you go, the more expensive it's going to be, and the more you're trying to, change the economy overnight instead of being able to do it over a reasonable period of time. It just seems like it's going to create a lot more disruptions the longer you wait.
I just look at it and I'm like,
and you seem beat down. You okay?
Down, man. Like following this stuff day to day is just soul crushing.
Yeah, I mean, really. I mean, it's like you're an emergency room doctor. You're just seeing one horror story after another. I mean, what's the upside? You're like,
the thing about the Paris Agreement
is it's just better to go down fighting. I guess. No.
The thing about the Paris Agreement to me was that was the one accord, the one thing that it seemed like the entire world came to the table on. I mean, how many issues does the entire world, 100 and how many countries, 90 or something? And you leave that, it's just such a weird position. I can't.
Well, not Syria, Nicaragua. So you can't discount that.
Yeah. Okay.
But Nicaragua was not participating because they thought it didn't go far enough, right? It was basically just Syria. It's like the United States Republican Party and Syria are like the two entities who do not think climate change merits being addressed.
Well, we got to move on.
Fair, Syria has other fish to fry. Syria has a few other problems to take off the to-do list before they start worrying about that.
Okay, we got to move on.
Man.
We got to move on. Thanks for that, Lewis.
What's that?
We got to move on.
Yeah. You got something uplifting for us?
Well, we just go to outdooralliance.org and get on the mailing list. Stay up to date, make your voice heard. Thanks for all the work. Policy administrator. What are you now, Lewis? What's your title?
Policy director.
Policy director. Yeah.
I come with a fat pay raise?
Not fat enough. Luckily, I'm making that sweet podcast money to supplement.
All right, now we got how about our we got a ladies edition coming to the Hammer Factor. Lewis, do you know anything about this? I know, John, you know a little bit because I've talked with your wife about it, I believe. Yeah. But Lewis, have you heard of this?
No.
Yeah, so we're gonna have coming up, and it may be like a regular occurrence, maybe once a month or something if we can get it together. But we got a full ladies panel, and they have a series of topics and issues, and I'm just gonna be sitting here running the board. It's gonna be the best Hammer Factor ever.
I'm going to take a well-needed vacation. Maybe go to the beach.
So that's exciting.
Summer reading.
That'll be really cool. So what I want to prime, the reason
That's cool.
Let me. The reason is what I want to bring up is viewers send in your viewer mail in regards to this ladies takeover of the Hammer Factor, because
right. When's this? It's going to be in this month or next month?
It's going to be at the end of this month.
End of this month.
So you got a couple weeks. But
do we know who's doing it?
We got a good panel.
I think
Kara's going to be on there. Kara Weld's going to be on there. Maria Noakes is going to be on there. There's a couple other people. I think it's going to be a 4-person panel at this point. So
she's written Nicole Lancaster, although I'm not sure if we heard back from her yet.
People aren't going to want us back afterwards.
Well, that could be. I know, especially after your dire predictions.
Yeah.
I mean,
let me get a Band-Aid for my
really
wrist here.
Audience here. Can you put a positive spin on this?
Jesus Christ. All right, should we get into Dr. Rocco?
Yeah, we should do that because I know he's on a tight schedule.
Yeah.
You know,
and he's
a doctor.
First of all, I want to say that I think a lot of diseases are fake.
Very legitimate point.
You like that? All right, let's see if he comes on. I'm dialing him as we speak. John, tell us a little bit about Dr. Rocco.
Well, actually, he's a guy.
Hey, it's Rocco.
Hey.
Hey.
Rocco.
Yeah.
John Weld here.
Rocco, you're on the Hammer Factor with John Weld, Lewis Geltman, and John Grace. Right. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
All right.
Thanks for being here. So I was sort of giving you a very brief introduction because you're going to have to take over in a second. But Rocco lives down the street from me, and he, you know, when this whole amoeba thing came up with the girl who died in Charlotte, I asked Rocco about it because Rocco, you are, what's your title?
Yeah, so I am an infectious disease pathologist and work in a diagnostic microbiology lab that would diagnose infections such as amoebic encephalitis. Not that I've ever seen a real case, but yeah, that's what I do.
So I asked Rocco about that. And I found it to be fascinating. I've been trying to get him on the show for a couple months now, and I think we finally made it happen.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Rocco, you work at WVU, and what my understanding of your job is that basically when someone gets sick in West Virginia and no one's quite sure what it is, it somehow winds its way to you where you help figure out what's going wrong. Would that be?
Yeah. Yeah, so I run the hospital laboratory. And so, as a pathologist, I don't actually see patients, but when people think of pathologists, they generally think of, medical examiner, forensic autopsies and stuff. Mm-hmm. But essentially I specialize in infectious diseases. So I work with infectious disease physicians so a patient is referred here because they have a bizarre tropical illness or some sort of febrile illness that nobody can figure out what's going on. And so they refer them here. The ID docs see them, and then we consult in terms of what is the best approach to making a laboratory diagnosis. What specimens do we need to collect? Can we grow the organism, or do we need to do antibody type testing, molecular type testing, that kind of thing? Right.
So, let's start with the amoeba because that's kind of what got this whole thing started, and it's kind of it's a certainly unusual situation, right? There was a girl was she rafting or kayaking? Grace, do you know how this went down?
She was a rafting visitor.
She was rafting on the Charlotte Whitewater course, which is an artificial course in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it's a recirculating water course, and she got this amoeba. When I think of amoeba, I think of like second grade where we looked under the microscope and saw like a little blobule thing. And then Rocco was, when I brought up to him, he was basically, you were surprised this had actually happened, right?
Yeah. It's a tragic case. And I think it's a very uncommon scenario. Generally the typical way somebody gets amoebic encephalitis is, they're swimming in a stagnant pond somewhere in the south where it's, really warm water temperatures, where amoeba will basically, they'll line the bottom of a pond. And if you start stirring up the water, you can actually, get it onto your nasal mucosa, and it will invade directly into the brain. It's again a very uncommon infection in the United States. But for somebody to
go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, for somebody to have acquired it in a treated facility, and a treated water facility, is just unheard of.
Well, how did that happen then? I mean, what's the what went wrong?
I don't know. I mean, it's obviously there was a problem with the water treatment. So, I mean, I read a little bit after we discussed it, and I guess the CDC investigation found that levels of amoeba higher than any measurement they'd ever made, even in natural habitats.
Huh.
So, and they went into the discussion of what went wrong with it wasn't a chlorination system, I don't think. I mean, I don't know the whole story behind the filtration system.
To my understanding, it was a UV filtration system, and essentially there was some moss or something that was growing on the lights, and it kind of quit working.
Yeah,
that's my understanding.
It's interesting though, because she's the only one, as far as I know, who came down with this infection, and everybody who's rafting that day is potentially exposed. So that might also have something to do with the reason it's such a rare infection. It may be not only related to the virulence of the organism, but potentially host factors as well.
So you're saying that she could have been predisposed to this kind of a problem somehow.
Well, potentially, because I mean, obviously that didn't happen overnight. That failure of the water treatment system. So if the levels were really that high, then potentially everybody who had rafted and swam for the preceding couple weeks, was exposed to pretty high levels.
Are these amoeba, like if you go to a stagnant pond in Louisiana and dive down to the bottom of the mud, are these amoebas everywhere, or is it these kind of things just rare to begin with?
No, they exist in nature. No, they're not rare. I mean, you could find them pretty easily, I would think.
Yeah, and if you get one of these in your nose, are you certain to get sick, or is it even then it requires some other circumstances?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the answer, but I presumably not, because again, I mean, I think a lot of people had direct mucosal exposure from this whitewater facility.
So what happens when this thing gets inside of you? I mean, I know it's sort of getting gory, but
yeah. So you have these. So your nasal mucosa, kind of, abutting your sinuses. You have this thing called a cribriform plate where all these vessels come through, and so it's sort of a chink in the armor, I guess. And so these amoeba, for whatever reason, have the ability to transmigrate basically across your mucosa directly into the anterior part of your brain. And I mean, once they're there, I mean, any infection in the brain is not good. And the problem oftentimes with this infection in particular is that nobody thinks of it, and the longer therapy is delayed, the less likely is you have a good outcome.
Right.
So let me ask you, as paddlers, most of our viewership here are paddlers. What kind of diseases are there in the water?
Like, what's more common? Like, amoebas are obviously uncommon. What's more common? And I want to preface this by saying John Grace, when he paddles in California, just drinks water right out of the river, does not treat it. Would you recommend that? And would you say that that's something you could get away with in California?
Before we get into me,
in the country?
Before we get into me, let's hear some of the things that paddlers are gonna. I mean, what other kind of diseases have you seen with the paddler?
Yeah, well, I mean, I should preface all this by saying I've seen very few of the infections that we'll probably talk about today, because in a hospital-based lab in West Virginia, I see mostly typical kind of infections. But I was thinking about this when John asked me to come on. There aren't a whole lot of infections directly related directly to water exposure. So immersing oneself in fresh or salt water, and I guess we're talking about fresh water primarily here. But two that so aside from amoeba, free-living amoeba like can't even call their names now. Acanthamoeba and Naegleria are the two big ones. Aside from those, Leptospira is a spirochete that can be acquired just not drinking the water, just being exposed to water. And then the other one is schistosomiasis. So that's a helminth infection. So it's a fluke worm, basically. And both of those organisms can basically penetrate the skin, Certainly, if you have open sores or even a scar or a scab, again, you have a loss of that barrier mechanism to prevent types of infections like this, and so these organisms can migrate into the skin, through the skin, and then become a systemic sort of disseminated infection.
So how would you know if you had one of these things?
Well, that's a good question. So Leptospira, it can cause basically a variety of different symptoms. Most folks who have Leptospira probably don't even realize they have it. Maybe they have a short-lived febrile illness, but by and large, it's self-limited, and so even without therapy, their immune system, clears the infection. A small subset of people, though, will go on to develop severe disease, and that could be, bleeding from your lungs, liver failure, kidney failure. And those are the ones that typically come. Yeah, that's not good. Those are the ones that typically would come to medical attention.
What did Tyler have? Was that? It was lepto something.
Leptospirosis?
Yeah, leptospirosis.
Yeah.
Leptospira.
Well, yeah.
So it's related to syphilis. It's related to the spirochete that causes Lyme disease. And, all three of those organisms cause all kinds of manifestations. I mean, it will differ from person to person.
No, I think Tyler had leishmaniasis. Is that some kind of Leptospira? Is that?
Mm-mm.
Wait.
That's a protozoan.
Okay, that's what he had, leishmaniasis.
And so the stuff that we're talking about, is this more common in like warm water, in water where there's a lot of contamination from people around, or?
Yeah. Well, schistosomiasis and Leptospira both would be acquired from water that's contaminated, from urine and or feces. But Leptospira would be rodent urine, so it's not like it can be a pristine waterway and still harbor this organism. Leptospira, I think, is hugely underdiagnosed. I think we don't, like I said, really the only people who come to a medical attention, those who have a really severe infection might get diagnosed. But I think in somebody who's returning from, whitewater trips in Central and South America with a febrile illness that nobody can really diagnose, I think Leptospira should always be in the differential.
What's a febrile illness? What's that mean?
So fever. If you have, I think probably everybody gets fevers that are hopefully short-lived. When they travel into developing countries. Mm-hmm. But if the fever doesn't go away, then it's an unspecified febrile illness. It may or may not have other manifestations like skin rashes or diarrhea or respiratory problems.
So let's bring it down to like actual day-to-day, more everyday paddling. Last weekend we did an overnight trip with the kids on the river. We're in kayaks, so we're trying to pack light. This is the upper section of the Potomac, which has tons of agriculture and who else, whatever, remnant coal businesses around there and stuff. Is it reasonable for us to prepare our dinner just by taking a pot down to the river, scooping the water up and boiling it, and making dinner with it? Is that going to take care of everything?
Yes. Yeah. If you're boiling the water, you should be fine. Now,
you might be eating sterile feces, but you'll be fine.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, so drinking the water brings up a different menu of pathogens, though, and by boiling the water, you would eliminate, the risk for all of those waterborne, ingested pathogens.
Should you be worried about agricultural chemicals in the water that just don't get boiled out, or the parts per million be so small in that kind of circumstances? Not even worth worrying about.
Yeah, I don't know. Couldn't answer that.
So if you're out paddling and you're play boating in the river, you get tons of water up your nose and your mouth, and you're spitting it out constantly. What's going on there? What you're saying, it brings up a whole other host of problems.
Right. Yeah. So swallowing contaminated water can, that can bring on. There's many infections: bacterial, protozoal, probably even some helminth infections, worm infections, just by swallowing contaminated water. So Giardia, for instance, that's probably the one of the more common gastrointestinal pathogens acquired by ingesting contaminated water.
And what's Giardia come from? Like, we all know we've all heard about it, but what is it? It comes from.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's a protozoan. It's not. So I guess it's more closely related to Leishmania than Leptospira and that sort of thing. But it's a flagellate. I don't know. It's a protozoan.
Yeah.
So let me ask you on these. It seems like some people are a lot more susceptible to these kind of protozoa and whatnot from drinking it, and others are a little less likely. Are there any proven trends on that, or a way to not be so susceptible to these kind of things?
That's a good question. I think we don't know a whole lot about the epidemiology of many of these, tropical infections, certainly, but even, domestically, some infections that just aren't reported and aren't reportable. So if they're not tracked consistently from state to state, then we really don't know, what the incidence is, what the prevalence is in a certain place, and then, what are the actual risk factors and potentially protective aspects from person to person. So, you could speculate, but obviously people in younger age tend to do better. People who aren't malnourished tend to do better. But yeah, just trying to come up with specific ways to protect yourself to bolster your immune system or something. I don't know.
I guess I'm curious how common these things really are. Like, we were just talking and giving Grace a hard time about never treating water. And, I've certainly gone back and forth with whether or not I just drink right out of the river, sort of based on just kind of my feeling about how clean it is or what's upstream of where I am. I drink out of our local river here in Washington every day. Mm-hmm. And I feel like there are folks who you see, kind of friends who are just like unbelievably casual, will drink out of the river like pretty much anywhere and never have any problems. And then other people who are like unbelievably strict about, treating anything that they drink. And I don't really see a huge difference. I guess I'm just curious how common, things like Giardia really truly are. Like even the things that are not horrible and rare and life-threatening.
Yeah, that's a good point. Giardia is the most common parasitic, gastrointestinal parasite we see in our lab. So it is evident. It is prevalent in this state, and I would guess in the West as well. But does that make it just because it's the most common doesn't necessarily make it common?
Right.
So, yeah, and again, because we don't really track the number of infections that occur, number of Giardia cases that occur each year, and where they were acquired, it's really hard to say, how big is the risk.
Interesting.
Do you think it's possible to build up immunity to some of these things? Like maybe it's a good idea to drink water out of the river all the time?
Well, yeah, that's true. I think, I listened to the episode with the guy with leishmaniasis this past weekend, and I think he was talking about the locals and how they're exposed to this parasite. But I think there is something to being exposed. It will boost immunity, and you will be less likely either to acquire the infection or either to develop severe infection down the road. So, yeah, there may be something to that.
I felt like we traveled to Mexico, and I spent 2 or 3 months in Mexico kayaking, every year for 5 or 6 years. And I think after the first or second year, my incidence of getting sick on or off the water, eating local food or whatever, dropped to about 0 after the second year.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's just anecdotal or if there's some evidence behind my body somehow becoming more prepared to handle that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think probably the latter. There are, many, many things that kids in Mexico are exposed to that kids in the U.S. aren't exposed to. And so just inherently, if they make it to adolescence and adulthood, they don't die of dehydration because of severe diarrhea for the first 5 years of life, then they will have some immunity and less likely to get sick from the things that our kids would get sick by.
Well, so to go back to that question earlier about the camping and stuff like that, two things we used to do is iodine tablets. How effective is that for treating water?
I think not as effective as boiling. I don't know that much about water sanitation methods. Mm-hmm. It's better than nothing, I suppose. Right. But I think filtration is probably even better than iodine treatment.
Iodine doesn't kill cryptosporidium, does it? I think I've heard that.
Right. So some of the things that aren't metabolically active, so things that form equivalent to a spore, essentially, wouldn't be treated with iodine.
And then go ahead.
I've been using bleach to treat water lately, like household bleach, like 2 or 3 drops in a Gatorade bottle. We've had good results. I've not gotten sick from it. It was what we used the whole time we were down in Peru, drinking some pretty nasty river water. And
I've never heard of that. Just straight up
bleach. I've heard of it, but
straight bleach. It's that's how they treat water in drinking water facilities, right? But then they have something to neutralize the chlorine afterwards. But it's the chlorine that actually kills whatever's in the water.
Rocco, you sound very, very skeptical.
Well, please.
I want to go ahead and
Rocco's like, this guy doesn't even treat his water. This guy's putting bleach in it. Who are these idiots?
This is Louis' moment to sound like Grace when he's talking about doing military press for his shoulder.
So bleach can be pretty caustic to any cell. So yeah, it may kill protozoa, but it may also wreck your GI epithelium. So, I guess it's low enough concentration. But
we'd always heard paddling in Newfoundland. They had a ton of tannic acid in the water there. They were like a deep, deep brown. That the tannic acid would kill most stuff in the water. What do you think? What's your gut feeling on that?
Yeah, there's also probably a lot. Far fewer potential pathogens in water that cold relative to the water, in Central America. But yeah, there's probably something to that.
Let me ask you about this is off the water topic. So what about Lyme's disease? Tell me a little bit about Lyme's disease. Was it created by the government?
So what year?
And how prolific is it? It seems like it's like a disease on the rise,
Well, we had
it is. It definitely is.
We had a conversation a couple weeks ago, and I came up to him and said, I'm going to get Lyme sooner or later, and I was asking him for a Lyme vaccine. And there's one for dogs out there, and I was like, just give me that one because it's not going to hurt, and I'm going to get Lyme sooner or later. I just know it because, I spend half my time outdoors crawling through weeds, And Rocco pointed out, he said, you wouldn't worry about it. Go ahead. Because I thought that was,
So we went on a trip 2 weeks ago, and I pulled ticks off me when I got home. They happen not to be the ticks that transmit Lyme, but even so, you're going to be exposed to them if you're in the wilderness and in the Northeast, and that territory is now expanding. That geographic distribution of the tick vector is certainly expanding. So, I've been in West Virginia for 8 years. We had maybe a handful of cases every year, always over in the Eastern Panhandle, and it's basically encroached now. So we're seeing Lyme in almost every county, and that's primarily because of the tick vector. So the Ixodes scapularis, black-legged tick, or some people call it a deer tick. But yeah, it's definitely expanding. But no, I wouldn't worry about it because it's a completely treatable illness. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of hysteria around Lyme for some reason. I don't think it was invented by the government because there's a nice paper, the original description was a rheumatologist in Connecticut. So
yeah, I thought it was on that
Probably.
island where they were like creating, weapons with certain diseases. I thought that's how.
Did this doctor work for the CIA?
I'm telling you.
you know.
he's a pediatrician.
Well, I think it
got
was.
him.
CIA.
Weld's going to get the veterinary vaccine, and John Grace is going to get a tip hat, and we'll all be set.
So you get Lyme's, right? And the way you said it is you'll see the bullseye, right? I mean,
Not always.
yeah.
Maybe half to 2/3 of cases should have a rash.
Right.
That bullseye rash, but not always.
Right. And then how do you, so barring a rash, how would you know that you have Lyme's? Like, how can you identify that and get treatment? And from my understanding, the longer you wait for treatment, the worse it gets.
Well, it carries on its natural history, and so it does disseminate, and it may cause. I'm going to say this now and sort of second guess my original premise, and that it's not that important. But you get heart block, so it can actually cause arrhythmias. It can go to your brain and cause meningitis, but typically it doesn't do those things. So you'll have sort of just a non-specific, again, fever, joint pain, and if you have tick exposure and you're tested, you diagnose it and treat it.
And these tests are accurate and easy to do? I mean, it's not like you're going to get a false positive or false negative 50% of the time?
No. False negatives can occur, so you miss it, in somebody who has the disease, but generally not once the disease manifests. And so it's the patient who comes in, after, a weekend in the woods and says they were exposed to ticks and they want to be tested. If they have Lyme, then it's not, the antibody won't have developed by then. And so that would, early on in infection would be the highest risk of a false negative test.
So go ahead.
I was just going to say not too many false positives. So if you have a positive result, then it may mean that you've had Lyme in the past, not that your current symptoms are due to Lyme, but it's at least suggestive that you've had Lyme in the past.
So what's this with people who get Lyme's and nothing's working? I mean, they're chronically ill for years. What's that?
Yeah. So I think a lot of that is not Lyme. And so there are a lot of, so the testing is not great. So when we have for instance, you have a patient who has a nasty staph infection or a strep infection. We can grow that organism in the lab very easily and say, okay, this is what's causing your infection. For Lyme, it's a spirochete, and it's not easy to grow. And so we basically, to diagnose it, you have to rely on the production of antibody, so the person's immune system revving up. And evidence of that immune system revving up is what tells us, okay, yes, the patient has Lyme now, or at least has had it in the past. But the problem is that depending on the lab test you use and the sort of the threshold that you use to gauge a positive result, a lot of people will be diagnosed incorrectly with having Lyme disease, based on So in that sense, it's kind of like a false positive. But these are labs that don't really follow the strict guidelines for serologic testing. And then, secondly, you have patients who really have no epidemiologic risk factors for having acquired Lyme, and yet their manifestation, their clinical symptoms are very vague. I'm feeling tired, I'm weak, I have no energy, all my joints hurt all the time. If you test 1,000 of those patients, a few of them are going to test positive for Lyme. Again, because it's not a 100% specific test. And if there's no possibility that the patient has Lyme, then it doesn't matter what the test says. The patient doesn't have Lyme.
Right. That kind of strikes me as the human condition. You're tired, your joints ache.
That was me this morning.
Yeah, that's just
Let me ask you real quick here, because we have to kind of move on to some other things, Doctor. But what is the most common thing that an outdoor enthusiast, a paddler, someone who's hiking around rapids, someone who's in the U.S. What's the most common thing they need to worry about? What's the most prevalent?
I guess it would depend on what part of the country you're trouncing around in.
Well, let's break it down.
Certainly.
Let's start up in kind of the West Virginia zone. Then we'll do southeast, and then we'll go out west.
Yeah. Well, so I think tick-borne, mosquito-borne illnesses are probably the most concerning for any avid outdoors person. And so Lyme in New England, and now, spreading down into even as far south as West Virginia, would certainly be a concern. Ehrlichia and anaplasma are two rickettsial-like diseases that are transmitted also by ticks, although different ticks, and Rocky Mountain spotted fever. So that can be deadly, and certainly down in North Carolina, Tennessee, would be a potential concern. Now, again, none of these are hugely prevalent, so it's something to be concerned about, but the risk, I think, is still overall quite low. Out west, I'm not so familiar with. I don't think so. Lyme, for instance, is much less prevalent out there than it is in the upper Midwest and New England, but it does occur on occasion. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know of anything that nothing's comes to mind as being okay. You have to watch out for that.
Grace, why are you spreading fear?
Right. Well, I'm just knock on wood. Like, fully want to knock on wood. I'm not spreading fear because, I've had ticks all over me, all over South America and different places. I don't treat my water. I grew up in the most polluted county in the most polluted state in the U.S. I'm making it fine. I just wonder, I just wonder what you should be worried about.
So maybe just to wrap it up here, because I know this is something I'm interested in as well, is a lot of paddlers travel, especially travel to Latin America. What would be some just general hygiene do's and don'ts for traveling south? Just in terms of not only just being on the river, but eating and drinking and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I would recommend boiling water if you're not filtering it. But boiling's probably even better than filtering it, and arguably easier.
How long do you have to boil water to be effective? Like a minute? Is boiling just?
Yeah, tops. A minute's plenty.
Yeah. Okay.
Most things are going to be killed almost, at temperatures that high instantaneously, but a minute certainly is safe.
Okay.
In terms of, foodborne disease, whether you're, in the wilderness or in a town, is something to be concerned about. And you obviously want to avoid sketchy meals. You want to make sure that everything's cooked. And then insecticide, I guess, is another important
like
point.
a DEET or something like that.
Yeah.
Is DEET really the best thing that you can do?
As far as I know, John, I don't. I think so.
And you mentioned, I know personally, you've mentioned to me you wouldn't eat shellfish or fish typically on a trip like that.
Yeah, so you can get a lot of stuff from fish and shellfish, particularly when it's not cooked. But it depends on where you are, because your risk of, again, the things that are transmitted by those foods are probably much less common than typhoid is, and Shigella, and
right.
Those are going to be transmitted by the chef, no matter what he or she's cooking.
Right.
And again, you can't really avoid that kind of thing. It's not something you can protect yourself against unless you bring all your own food.
Right. And would you take Cipro I know some people take Cipro, which is an antibiotic, it's just prophylactically before they go overseas. Do you think that's overkill?
I would take malaria prophylaxis, if I were going to a malaria endemic area, but not just in, like what area?
No. What would you take? Because I remember like Lariam is hard to, or has a kind of a controversial history. We've taken it before. I'm not. What would you recommend as a malaria?
Well, I'd go to the travel clinic and take what they gave me. I don't know. I mean, some people use a tetracycline-based prophylaxis. Some people use quinine-based. Yeah, but I would take something. I think going to a travel clinic ahead of time. Have you guys been vaccinated for stuff?
I've been vaccinated for pretty much everything at some point or another.
Yeah.
Yeah, we spend time in weird places.
I think, yellow fever vaccine, for instance, probably protects to some extent. I mean, not completely protective, but would protect to some extent against dengue and some of the other flaviviruses. So, I think going to a travel clinic ahead of time is probably worthwhile advice.
Mm-hmm.
But I would not, getting back to your question, would not just indiscriminately take ciprofloxacin or really any antibiotic because you can actually do more damage than actual benefit.
Right.
So just wrecking your intestinal flora and that sort of thing.
Would you bring those with you? If you got really sick, take it then, or would you just not do that at all? Like, how would you?
Well, that's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
It depends on how readily accessible antibiotics would be wherever you're going to end up. If you're out in the middle of nowhere,
and get a script for Cipro.
Yeah.
And so you take Cipro with you. Would that be the one you take? And then if you just suddenly get horribly ill and for days on end you start taking Cipro, would that be kind of how you do that?
Yeah, that's a shot in the dark, but that's what you would do. And Cipro would help mostly against the bacterial agents that cause diarrhea. So obviously it's not going to help with malaria or leishmaniasis or things, even the rickettsial illnesses, the tick-borne and mosquito-borne diseases wouldn't be affected by Cipro.
Right. Well, I may just stay inside. I don't know.
On that note, Doctor, before we let you get back to your day, give us a horror story.
Yeah. Give us some red meat. This is the clickbait part of the episode.
Yeah, give us just you're like, oh my God, I've never seen somebody so ate up with Lyme's disease, leishmaniasis, hepatitis A, some Chagas.
You guys saw the picture of Tyler. John showed me this thing on his phone. Oh my God. That was pretty horrendous. But those can get even more disfiguring. He's lucky. I think it only got his lip, and but if that gets into the nasal cavity and the sinuses, it basically your whole front of your face can cave in. It's terrible. I've never actually seen a case of that. Huh. Yeah, nothing comes to mind. Sorry, man.
We can just always reference Tyler. That's fine.
Yeah.
That was something else. All right. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks very much.
Yep. Take care.
Well, that was pretty interesting.
Man, that was great.
Crazy stuff. I talked to him for hours about this stuff. I'm not like a hypochondriac, but it is just interesting. He has, the thing is, he sees some weird stuff coming through West Virginia. People go overseas and they come back, and you get these doctors in West Virginia who are like, I don't know what the heck's going on here. So
I don't know, man. It's kind of like, like if you're around a bunch of bees and you don't want to get stung, you just act like they're not there. That's my technique.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like we got confirmation that it's okay to just drink out of the river. That's what I heard.
That's what I got.
Yeah.
If you make it past 5 years old, you're good to go, so.
I feel like, I do feel like if it's like the Yaak River, whatever's in the Yaak River, it's in me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that way about the Potomac.
Yeah, I feel
You know,
the same.
like I'm
You
like
know,
25% yak water.
with that amoeba story, I just kept thinking about when we were campers in Valley Mill, and we would go do the hike and river swim, and we would like walk up, and there was this pond.
Here we go again.
It was just like, just this stagnant pond with like this thick layer of green algae on the top, to the point that it looked like you could walk on it.
Yep, I know where you're going with this.
Every time you go by, Andy Bridge would be like, "I got $1 for you if you just like submerge your entire head in that pond."
Right.
Just,
Right. Yeah. Dang, you got an amoeba.
Dude, we gotta do I don't know anything about you guys' Valley Mill days, but we need to do just a show where you guys just talk about Valley Mill days.
It was like basically where you took sort of sheltered white middle class kids from suburbia Maryland and you put them into this savage boot camp of hardcore weird 18th century whaling ship ethics.
I think that's what our intern thought about the Hammer Factor.
Am I capturing this correctly?
There's some of that for sure. I was thinking there's some like Lord of the Flies to it as well, probably.
Yeah, and it was definitely random. Like who could do? Like we made a kid eat spaghetti until he threw up, then made him eat it again.
Okay.
And like even the little kids, we have a sand baby contest, like the 4 and 5 year olds, where we make them get soaking wet and cover themselves with sand and stick it in their mouths. We call it a sugar baby.
Okay. We're running low on time here. We're already at 50 something minutes. So let's save the multi-day stuff for next week, John.
Okay.
I like that, but that's like a 20-minute conversation, you know.
All right. Yeah, I'm with you.
All
right.
Let's talk about the new Nirvana creek boat from Jackson Kayaks. Lewis, you've had some experience with this boat, and you were referencing it earlier on the show. Tell me what you were saying again.
Yeah, let's hear what you were saying again, real quick.
Why you guys always try to bait me into it?
That's a really interesting point earlier before we got on the air. What was that again? I can't.
Why was it you said that Jackson Kayak sucked?
So let me just start. You can gather your thoughts here, Lewis. So this is a 9-foot racing creek boat from Jackson Kayaks. I believe it would be their
right. It's a Me Too 9R. Would I be safe in saying that?
Yeah, I believe this is their answer to the 9R.
Okay.
So, but I've never paddled it or been around it.
In their defense, you could say that many of the Piranha Creek boats have been Me Too rock stars, or Piranha Play boats, rather.
Oh yeah, exactly.
All right, there's nothing new under the sun.
So Lewis, tell us about the boat. You've seen it. You've watched the boys paddling it.
Yeah, I've seen it. I haven't paddled it. I think it looks really, really ugly. It sort of looks like it's got a little bit of that elf shoe look, and the stern looks really big and weird to me. But the boys seem very stoked on it, possibly in contrast to other Jackson designs.
Just because they're getting paid by Jackson, would you say, or?
Man, I feel like it's like if you just.
Not that that's bad, but you have to point out if you're getting paid by Jackson, you're probably more likely to like the boat.
Well, I mean, if you've been eating bread and water for years, and suddenly somebody gives you like a Big Mac or something, that Big Mac probably seems like high cuisine, you know.
What bread and water were they eating before? They're like in a Noah Jetty.
Well, like the Zen or the Karma, or.
Well, I'm gonna find one. I'm gonna get in and paddle it and give you my 2 cents on it.
I saw the what's the new Waka boat? The Gangster, is that what it is?
Yeah.
I saw one on the river the other day. It's quite large. I mean, it looked like a 90+ gallon boat to me. Is that what this Nirvana is? I mean,
looks big from the pictures. I don't know. I just saw a thing. I didn't even know much about it during the design phase or anything. So
my problem is that I'm so particular about kayak outfitting that if I haven't outfitted a boat for myself, I know that it's just going to annoy me to paddle it. And so it just makes me like unbelievably lazy about trying new boat designs.
Which is weird.
I know I'm going to have a bad time when I'm paddling a boat that's like, you know, like
that is so un-Valley Mill though. You know what I mean? Because the Valley Mill way is for you to sit in an unoutfitted boat, basically just sitting on the hull with your legs straight out in front of you.
I think slalom racing took that out of me. You're right.
Huh.
So we got nothing on the new boat. I'll spend some time in it and see if we can come back with.
We can do what we always do, which is just speculate endlessly on boats that we haven't paddled and just say that they look like they suck.
You're right. We could pretend like we know something by saying they look like they suck. That's the easiest way to play that off.
We can only say that all these boats suck because the hammer factor sucks, and we know that it sucks. So we feel good about just. They suck.
Sucking.
Yeah.
Sucking in general. Just a gigantic suck fest.
Succubus. All right, rants and raves, boys. We're at an hour in. We've got to get on the rants and raves. Lewis, you're up.
I'm going to give you a 2-for-1 rant rave this week.
All right.
I went to California last weekend for Memorial Day. We went down there intending to run Devil's Canyon on the Middle Feather, and because the boys were all fired up, we decided to reduce our 3 days on the Middle Feather to a 2-day and go do the South Branch. And the rant portion of this is that I do not like low water, low volume kayaking. Like falling off 75 CFS 20 footers has zero appeal to me. And I know that I'm in the minority, and I know I need to get over my crusty attitude about it, but low volume kayaking.
Do it on a supboard. That would make it more interesting.
Like tobogganing. Yeah, maybe I should. Maybe the guy on South Silver on the sup has the right idea. But like South Silver is another one I put in this category that like everybody loves South Silver. And like, I think I'd rather sit in the parking lot and like read the New Yorker than South Silver. But the rave portion is after we got done with this Sufferfest on the South Branch, we went and did the Middle Feather, which I think I would put that in my top 5 all-time favorite multi-days. It is like the most underappreciated run in California in my book. We had really good water, like a little bit higher than I'd ever been in there before, like maybe 31 or 3,200.
Oh, that's big.
And it was just 30 miles of like class 5 minus. Just like mostly read and run, a lot of rapids where one person would scout, a lot we were kind of just like peering over from the top, and you're like, this is going to be scary, but I can see that there's a pool down there at the bottom somewhere. It's going to work out. Just like so beautiful, awesome camping, nobody out there. Like one of the best runs in California. One portage and 30 miles. Just so much whitewater in there.
What was
in your defense, Lewis, I think we all end up with your opinion of good whitewater versus bad whitewater.
I think that's what happens when you get old, is like the novelty of just running waterfalls kind of wears off if they're not complicated or hard, just falling off things. And then you're still soaked on running rapids. But this is the Devil's Canyon section in the Middle Feather, like above Bald Rock. All-time classic. And like, yeah.
Mr. Weld?
Okay, I got a rant. No. I'm sorry. I have a rave. You ready? It is the old school MSR XGK stove, XGK2 specifically, the multi-fuel stove. I'm talking about the kind that has the 4 little pins that swing out and you put your pot on top of it, right?
You're losing credibility.
Dude, I have had that stove. Okay, just shut up. I've had that stove since like probably the 80s, and it has been all over the world. I mean, it has been used hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times for sure, in every conceivable combination of misery that you could imagine. And for this trip we did last weekend, I busted that thing out. It's been sitting with fuel in it for probably 2 years, right? Fired right up. And it just brought tears to my eyes. How simple that thing is to strip down, fix, get it back up and running. There's no nonsense. You can burn diesel, you can burn kerosene, you can burn gas, you can burn stove fuel. It burns anything.
Do you think the Whisper Light International is as good as those original ones?
Probably, but this is the one that I have and the one that I just feel so connected with. You know what I mean?
That's a classic piece of gear.
It does, and it's just like every gas has two different kinds of gaskets on it. You know what I mean? So, two different sizes. They're easy to replace. It comes with a little kit. You can strip the thing down in about 5 minutes and rebuild everything. It's just not. It's the opposite of junky throwaway gear that's so common nowadays.
Those are awesome, man. It's like I think that those canister stoves that everybody uses now are like the K-cups of
and just
world. It's like you're just producing waste endlessly.
Yeah, right? Yeah, and that's definitely my takeaway from those things. So it takes forever to boil water. I know it's loud. It sounds like a jet taking off, but I don't care. It's American craftsmanship at its best, I would say.
There you go.
For the outdoor community. All right, Grace, what do you got? How was I losing credit on that? What's more core than an old school MSR stove?
Well, I didn't know that's where you were going with it. So I'm going to go ahead and let you slide on this one. But
all right.
I'm going to rave. I'm going to rave. And I'll also tell you another benefit of those stoves is you're never going to know when you need some of that fuel for something else, like you run out of gas.
That's right.
Or
I started a fire. I poured some gas on the fire because it was pouring rain at the time we were camping. And guess what? It was wood soaking wet till light with gas on it.
So
it'll take your eyebrows off too, but it's going to go.
So probably doesn't weld boats as well as a jet weld it.
So I'm going to rave about 14-foot long stand-up paddle boards and stand-up paddleboarding.
Oh no!
Yeah, Wells really losing credibility with that stove one.
Yeah. Let me just.
All right.
Well,
thanks, guys. I'm gonna go ahead and sign out.
Let me just
next week.
Hey, come on, bear with me for 1 second because I was thinking about you guys while I was paddling. So I'm dealing with this rib thing, and it's doing better. I'm going to the green tomorrow, so I'll have some actual kayaking stories, which I haven't had in 2 months and whatever. But anyway, I took this board out. I've taken it out 2 times. I borrowed it from Chris Grotman's. He had this board. I was like, we're going to try that out. So he let me borrow it. And it felt good. Rib was feeling good, whatever. But have you guys ever, this is what I noticed, have you guys ever, when you're just paddling attainments or paddling for any period of time more than like an hour, that you just feel like you're just grinding your vertebrae and your discs and your lower back to just nothing? You're just pulverizing them?
No.
Well, anyway, I do. Maybe it's back to me. But anyway, on this paddleboard, I didn't get that grinding, but I was still getting like the paddling, and I felt like I was like using my paddling muscles. And
you should try an elliptical. I'm
anyway,
just saying.
I'm gonna
That could be a
rave
$1 million
about
idea. You could like the Nordic track of SUP.
Jesus Christ.
Right?
I'm just gonna rave about my experience on that 14-foot long paddleboard, gliding along at like 7 or 8 miles an hour. I felt like the man. So
let's edit this out and just go ahead and rave about the BRAP, party BRAP.
I'll rave about that next week because I'm getting ready to take it out tomorrow. So
I paddled it yesterday. I loved it as much as the day I got it. It is the best boat.
It is so fun. It's all I use anymore.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to Hammer Factor, and send us some viewer mail about what you want our ladies panel to cover. I'm really looking forward to producing that one. So
should we call them the gals, or is that girls?
I'm gonna call them ladies. You can call them whatever you want.
Ladies. Yeah.
And you guys are, and just like you guys are gentlemen. So
thank you.
all right, everybody. Hammer Factor, we're out.